Hi all, welcome to the event. I am Tamas Bazsonyi. I am a sales engineer at Bitrise, and today we are going to talk about how you can speed up your builds on Android using Bitrise. First of all, we are going to talk about Android build performance and how you can speed up your Android builds using Bitrise. So what we can do to speed up your builds on Bitrise, um, really great option is to use Gradle Cache. So Bitrise by default provides the cache pool and cache pool steps, which are storing the given cache path on an S3 bucket. So this would make it possible to always download the given dependencies that you are using and downloading during your builds. To be able to use these, you can simply just select the given Android build step that you are using in your project. And in the options section, there is a set level of cache input. You can simply set that to only depths. And this would make sure that all the dependencies are stored on Bitrise in the cache archive. This also has a positive effect if, for example, in some cases, the given dependency hosting service becomes unavailable, because at first, the Gradle build itself would be checking if the given dependencies are already available on the build machine itself, and if they are, it wouldn't try to download it. Moving on to the next suggestion, it's related to using the Gradle cache as well. Most probably, most of you already know this, but if you are specifying the dependency version instead of specifying an exact static dependency version, Gradle would try to see if there is a later version of that given dependency. If not, it would be using the same one as before. If there is, it would try to update to the latest version. By setting a static version to a given dependency, you can assure that Gradle wouldn't start polling any kind of dependency hosting services and wouldn't try to download any newer versions and wouldn't really work on figuring out what is the latest version of that given dependency. Our next step would be to only include the necessary resources. During our work, we saw that lots of our customers are working for different markets as well. And this requires adding extra language files, extra images to your project, and extra resources. When you are running your UI tests, for example, you wouldn't really need to be prepared for all the languages that you are supporting by default. Usually a single language and a single density support would be enough for the generated APK. This would make sure that the APK size stays minimal, and also the compilation time would be as optimal as possible. To do this, you can simply just create a new flavor for UI testing, and you can specify which kind of resource configurations you would like to include in that given build. Next up is using legacy multidex. So the legacy multidex would be only used if you are using the min SDK version set to 20 or below. And this could also put some extra time on your builds. Simply just specifying a different flavor and setting the min_SDK version to 21 could simply improve your build speeds here as well. And the next step is disable Apk Split. So this would mean that you wouldn't be generating multiple APKs. So when you are running your UI tests, you wouldn't require each and every APK to be generated. You would only need a single configuration that you would like to build, a single ABI, and a single density APK. By simply disabling the Apk split, you would be able to make sure that the APK would be built as fast as possible, and you can make sure it stays on the minimal size. And our next suggestion would be to disable Crashlytics from the UI testing builds. So this would mean that when you are running your UI tests, by default, you would be able to get the logcat results of a virtual device that is running on the build machine, or you would be also able to get the related logs from any other service that you are using, including Crashlytics in your build in these times. What is happening is that it adds an extra dependency that also needs to be included, and it simply makes the compilation time longer. Yeah, and another thing that we didn't add to the slides is that when you are using a modularized project, you are able to specify org.gradle.parallel and set it true. So this will make it possible to run your builds in parallel. Well, it depends. So basically, the more dependencies you are using, the longer your build times will be. This also shows when you simply just look at the download speeds of the given dependencies and the building of the project itself as well. So even though if you are trying to minimize the given module and variants that are built during the Android build time, you would still see more and more dependencies built during the build if you are working on a complex project. Yeah, this is also a great suggestion. So there's an option to profile Gradle builds. It would simply be --profile, so something like this. And this would make it possible to get a report and see which are the given tasks that are running for the most time. Yes, so running lint and building apps is the slowest part of my build pipeline. How do I speed those up? Yeah, so one solution would be to also use the fan out functionality here. So we are talking about fan out today in the context of running your UI tests, but you can use fan out to run any other tasks in parallel as well. So you would be able to, let's say, fire up a workflow that would do linting for your project. And in the meantime, you would also be able to start building the APKs. Sample for this that we saw previously multiple times is that just before releasing to the App Store, there are some final tests that our customer wants to run, just to make sure that everything is really working fine. So in this case, what they can do is there's an option to fire up a new workflow, which would simply run the testing. The main workflow would simply build the given APK that can be uploaded to the Play Store. And just before the Play Store deploy step, it's possible to add a wait for builds Bitrise step to make sure that the started testing workflow also passes. So this would make sure that you only upload the given APK to the Play Store if the tests are passing. Also, on another hand, it would expose the APK itself, so you would be able to download it using the deploy to Bitrise IO step and test it manually as well. What is the best way to minimize build time with a multiple module project? Usually what we suggest is to only build the modules that are necessary for the given build. So for example, if you are looking at a simple Gradle command, like the one that I previously showed, that assemble debug, that would simply go through all the modules and create a debug configuration build for all of them. To make sure that you only build what is required for your module, you can specify the given module as well before the given Gradle task. If I set the build level cache to all, will it also cache the build artifacts? Why is this not the default setting? Are there any disadvantages? Usually we see that setting the cache level to all isn't necessarily worth the effort. So if there aren't any issues with cloning your repository, so the bandwidth is acceptable, and if there aren't any blockers that would absolutely require you to use the cache all setting, we suggest using the depths only. In this case, only the Gradle dependencies are stored, so the build artifacts aren't. And simply for storing build artifacts, the main functionality that we suggest to use is the deploy to Bitrise IO step. So that step is basically creating a public install page for the given artifact as well. And you are also able to query our API to simply download the given artifact. What's the best way handling animation when running UI tests on Bitrise? So it depends what you are using for your UI testing. Usually on simulators, we suggest turning off animations because the resources are so limited. And also because running an emulator on a CI environment is quite so slow and it can be really unstable. What fanout actually entails are my tests on a separate workflow. Yeah, so I think we also need to move on to our fanout section. So let's just talk about fanout, and this will answer your question. First of all, I wanted to mention another UI testing related section. So what you can do to make sure that your tests are running successfully on a CI environment is to prepare your test cases to run on a CI environment. This would mean that as a first step, you would be increasing your testing time. So you would need to make sure that you are creating logical sections from your UI tests. For example, let's say you are creating a login flow test suite. You are creating uh, subscription web test suite where you are first setting up the given test suite, like logging into your user account, navigating to your account settings page, and there you are testing different um, subscription options. And this would definitely make your testing times a bit longer, but in the long run, this would make it possible to run these test cases and test suites in parallel. Another crucial part would be to prepare for different environments. This is crucial because the network settings, network connections are different. So it can easily happen that, let's say, your tests on your office network run smoothly, while on Bitrise it would take a bit longer, just because due to your firewall settings in the office, it would limit the bandwidth on which the tests can communicate with the server. So making sure that you are first checking the UI to see if there is a UI element displayed, and making sure that you set an appropriate timeout for waiting a given UI element to be displayed can be crucial when you are running a CI/CD environment. Yeah, so let's talk about fan-out builds. So what are fan-out builds? Fan-out builds are simply builds that are triggering multiple other workflows. So this could mean basically anything from running on different test sets to running even a build job during your testing. So let's just have a quick look how this looks. So yeah, I'm just going to show you guys this sample setup. So during a fan-out build, you would have primary and basically main workflow that would be triggering all the other builds. This workflow is generating the APKs that we are going to use for testing. And after that, it simply just adds these APKs to the cache archive. The next step would be to start up the given builds. I prepared 7 different workflows, well, mostly the same workflows, and all these workflows would be running the tests in parallel. It's quite advantage that you can simply set the wait for builds option of this given step, because, for example, in this case, I could simply just move the content of one of these workflows right here and just have the Bitrise wait for build step pick up the status of the started builds. So I'm just going to show you one of these builds. So this is the main structure that I used for my fan-out builds. And the first step is the cache pull step. This step basically just pulls the cache archive that already contains the APKs. After that, I was using the virtual device testing step for Android. This is running on Firebase Test Lab, and I was running my instrumentation tests. After that, I simply just deployed the results that came back from Firebase. Yeah. And moving back here, we simply just collect all the results. You are going to be able to find this step in the blog post as well. It was created by Damien, who held the previous deep dive. And we simply use the deploy to Bitrise IO step to deploy the workflows. I'm just going to switch to one of these workflows. So you can see here that this was the UI test fan out FTL workflow that I previously mentioned. And this was my simple UI testing workflow. I'm just going to show you real quick how the UI test workflow looks like. It simply starts up emulator on Bitrise, make sure before running the tests that the emulator is up and running. And after that, I simply install the APKs and start the tests. Okay, and let's just have a real quick look at the results. So this was my UI test workflow. It ran for about 17 minutes, while the UI test fan out workflow ran for 11 minutes. So you can see here all the required and useful informations. So you can simply see here that the UI test workflow ran each iteration of the UI testing for about 1.2 minutes. And our testing step simply ran for 5.5 minutes with the fan out builds. Yeah, so is fan out consuming concurrency for each fan out build? If so, then it can be quite costly to increase concurrencies for being able to fan out jobs without blocking any other apps and Bitrise. Yes, correct. So each build is basically a separate build. So starting up a new build with the Bitrise start build step would consume another concurrency. It simply depends on your use case if it's worth the extra concurrency for you. So if you really have to run your test cases real fast, and the main thing that you are interested in is to get to the end of your build as soon as possible, it would most probably be useful to add an extra concurrency or two and be able to fan out without risking any kind of deadlocks created there. Is it better to break the build into multiple builds? For example, the code checks first, then kick off an app build, then kick off UI testing. Well, depends. So you are also able to separate these into separate workflows, and you don't necessarily have to use any kind of fan out technique to be able to simply run these workflows in after a single trigger. So there's an option to add workflow after, add workflow before on the workflow editor. And basically what this does is it runs in the exact same virtual machine, but simply adds the steps from the other workflow before or after the given workflow that you selected. But yeah, kicking off other builds would be useful if you have so many tests and the build takes so long. So by default, the build time limit is 90 minutes. So simply just adding a Bitrise start build step at the end of a given workflow would make it possible to, let's say, extend that build time by starting up a brand new build and doing other logic in that. What is the custom script that moves the APK? That was simply just a copy step. So, and you have successfully divided UI test into multiple set with multiple workflows. Yeah, so basically what you can simply do is, for example, on our virtual device testing step, in the instrumentation test section, you can specify the test runner class and the test target separated with a comma character. So you would be able to add any kind of packages there, any kind of classes, or you can go down even to a method name level. You can find this in the step input description. Could you share the YML? Yeah, sure. This will be available in the blog post. Anyone try Flank? Yeah, a couple of our customers already tried Flank. Currently, Flank requires Firebase Test Lab subscription, but it is a really great tool to shard your test cases. Is it possible to fan out using Bitrise workflows which are defined in the repository? What we saw usually is that our customers would use a simple mapping of the workflow name that is described on the online workflow editor and in the Bitrise YML. So this would mean that, let's say you would have a test one workflow on the web UI, and that would simply just have the activate SSH key step, the git clone step, and the Bitrise run step, where it would simply have workflow name input variable set to the current workflow. And you can duplicate this to basically all your workflows. And in the Bitrise YML that is stored in the repository, you would have the workflows with the exact same name. So let's say test one would have step to fire up the simulator, to start up instrumentation tests, and deploy the results. Sorry. Mm-hmm. If I'm correct, you would be able to do that simply by the specified AVD manager inputs. I think there's an AVD command flag for this that you can use, but feel free to ping us on support and we'll be able to uh, provide the exact solution. Mhm. Yeah, so does test report add-on work with fanned out builds? Yes, so you can simply just collect all the test results into the main workflow, and you would be able to simply pull that in to the test report add-on for the primary workflow that you were running. For this, you would simply just need deploy the Bitrise IO step and another step to collect all the generated reports in the started build. How many concurrencies were you using in your fan-out builds? I was using 10 concurrencies. So I had a main workflow, and I also had 7 testing workflows that I started. And Also, in the meantime, I always started another workflow that ran basically all uh, the tests in a single workflow as well, just to make sure that I'm starting the builds at the same time and there aren't any environment-specific differentiators that could uh, have any effect on the build time. There is a step to collect all the test reports, and uh, I think that was the one that I showed, the one that Damien created. But this will also be in the Bitrise YML that you can check out. Mhm. Yes, definitely. We are going to share the Bitrise YML. Yeah. Are you planning on allowing to group the fan out builds on the dashboard view? It would become quickly noisy and otherwise. Yeah, so currently this implementation of fan out builds is basically manually using the capabilities of the system. We see that lots of people are interested in using fan out builds and speeding up builds this way. And we are actively looking into the best possible solutions to um, simply support this on a platform level. So to make sure that we can provide a better way to configure your fan out builds and make sure that you can as easily set it up as possible. Are you planning to support sharing session data, project folder, build files when fanning out builds? Otherwise, there is a lot of overhead at the beginning of each sub workflow. To be honest, I didn't really look into this, but what I originally used is the cache pool and the cache push steps. And in the cache push steps, you would be able to simply provide any kind of path that you would like to share between different builds. So this would mean that when you are generating a new build, let's say, not in a fan out scenario, but simply when you are using Bitrise to build your application, the cache itself by default contains the Gradle folders if you don't disable the dependency caching in the Android build steps. And this would be available in all the other workflows as well. Did you compare time of fan-out builds on Firebase Test Lab with multiple AVDs in a single build parallelizing Gradle plugin like Spoon? Um, I started checking out the performance of Firebase Test Lab with AVD devices as well. But so far, what I've seen is that simply waiting for the given simulator is a bit slower when starting up a given build. And also, um, another thing that I saw is the tests ran faster on Firebase Test Lab than on the simulator. Yeah, definitely. It would need a bit more deeper investigation. Why does UI Automator code to deny permission? Not working when running on Firebase Test Lab through Bitrise, but it works perfectly locally. To be honest, I'm not 100% sure. Um, we have multiple test cases, well, our customers who weren't really facing the same issue. So I would have to need to look into this a bit deeper, but we will reach out after this webinar. What percentage of users run UI tests? Uh, To be honest, that's a really great question, and sadly, I don't have any data on this right now at this exact moment. Um, yeah, we can look into that and let you know if you are interested. Feel free to ping our support on the on-site chat and ask them to refer you to me. Can you add arguments to child workflow so that you only need one child workflow rather than seven? Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I know what you mean. There are multiple ways to achieve that. Um, One is the previously mentioned add before and add after workflows. So in that case, what you would be able to do is to simply just have a single testing workflow. As you previously saw, basically test one, two, and all the other ones were completely the same. So you can have that in a separate workflow, and you can create a few other workflows depending on what would be the given arguments that you would like to change between these workflows. So, for example, the test case runner's name and let's say the test device, for example. These workflows would only contain these environment variables, and all of them would be using the common testing workflow as add workflow after step. How do you handle getting test coverage when running tests on Firebase Test Lab? Um, if I'm correct, there is a separate flag that you would be able to simply set for also getting the coverage reports. And yeah, if you ping our support team, I think they would be able to provide the exact flag that you can set and the given input where you should configure. But uh, yeah, in the meantime, I just found it, sorry. So I'm just posting in the chat. Uh, Basically, this would be what you would need to pass on the environment variables input of our Firebase test lab step. And you would have to make sure that in the directories to pull, you also specify uh, this folder from the device. Yeah, we are going to reach out to you on this. We're using the cache to push, let's say, APKs to sub workflows. We do have to make sure parallel workflow did not push the cache before we pull again and the sub workflows correct. Yes, exactly. So just for this, basically I set up the given workflow to include the cache push step right before starting the fan out workflow builds. So this would make sure that we have absolutely the minimum amount of time until we have everything set up in the cache and push the cache and started new builds. Do I need to change my Bitrise account settings to use fan out builds? No, you don't need to do anything. You would only need to set up the workflows to support fan out builds. Mhm. Is there some data on how fan out builds might change my monthly costs? Um, yeah, so basically fan out builds are only using concurrencies, and in our current plans uh, and subscriptions, there aren't any um, limitations on the number of builds that you would be able to run. So you would be able to run any number of fan-out builds. The costs wouldn't multiply. So one issue that um, you can face during your fan-out builds is that you would be hitting your concurrency limits. And this would be an issue when you are starting up two of builds that are simply just fanning out. And one of the builds would simply just stay there and wait for starting up the given fan out build. And as you can see, it has been waiting for 66 minutes here. And this would cause the original build to time out as well. And you wouldn't be able to get the correct results. So how you can avoid this issue from happening? An option would be to have a check using script step on our Bitrise API to see if the concurrency count that is currently available on your user account or organization account and the currently running build count are both enabling you to start up enough builds that the given workflows, fan-out workflows would require. So you would simply be checking the currently running builds, the build count that is required for your fan-out build, and if some of these two values would be less than your current organization's limits, then you can simply just restart that given build. This would simply just place the given build to the end of the build queue, and it would make it possible to also abort that started build and try again later on when the queue is down. Basically, this was it so far. I see that we still have a couple of questions. I'm just going to move back here. Do we have to separate out the tests by ourselves to take advantage of fanout, or there is any plugin which do this? Yeah, so previously there was a conversation and a question about Flank. Flank would be a great tool to shard your tests into as much pieces as possible. So you would be able to do that. Otherwise, if you are manually fanning out and running fan out workflows, then you would need to specify either the given package or the runner class that could identify which tests should run in which workflow. I have some issues while trying to use your tool for cloning repository and using Fastlane for Android development. In order to make it work, I have to clone the repo via script and not using your tool. How could fix it? This is a really good question that would need some investigation. Could you please connect with our support team using the on-site chat? And I think they should be able to either help you right away or connect you to a team member who would be able to lend a hand with this issue. I still wanted to post two of our service items. And in the meantime, if you guys have any other questions, feel free to post in the questions area. Also, I wanted to highlight that you can see that there's our blog post already displayed for the webinar right at the top of this webinar screen. And we are also going to have another survey after this one, so please stick around and answer our questions that are related to this webinar. Awesome. I can see you guys are voting real fast, so thank you so much for that. And yeah, I just saw that we went over the webinar's time limit a bit, so sorry about that. Okay, and yeah, also just because it is survey time, I'm just going to post our other survey as well. And the team's going to post another one here as well after the webinar. So yeah, once again, thank you so much for joining this webinar. I hope we managed to answer as much of your questions as possible, and happy building.